The crystal spires of the Nethys royal palace stretched toward the amber sky, like fingers grasping for distant stars. Within the highest tower, Princess Zara Voss pressed her palm against the cool surface of the viewing wall, watching the aurora. Streams danced between the floating gardens that surrounded her gilded prison. Pain shot through her spine, the same merciless reminder that had tormented her since the quantum storm incident 3 cycles ago. The neural disruption was subtle but relentless, a consequence of exposure to unstable energy fields during a diplomatic mission. For 18 months, the royal physicians had exhausted every treatment in their vast arsenal: bioregenerative chambers, molecular restructuring, even the ancient crystal healing rituals of her ancestors. Nothing worked. "Your Highness," came the melodic voice of her attendant through the chamber's communication array. "The Empress requests your immediate presence in the private medical wing." Zara's reflection in the viewing wall showed the telltale signs of her suffering, the slight forward lean she adopted to ease the burning sensation, the way her shoulders never quite relaxed. But her ceremonial faceplate, crafted from polished obsidian and embedded with the 7 stars of her house, concealed her expressions perfectly. The medical wing carried the sterile scent of purification fields and suppressed desperation. Empress Thalia Voss stood beside a figure that made Zara's breath catch in her throat. A human, unmistakably alien, with his shorter stature, warmer skin tone, and those peculiar round ears. He wore simple traveling clothes rather than the elaborate ceremonial robes of their court, and his hands were completely bare. "Mother," Zara said carefully, her voice modulated by the vocal harmonizers in her faceplate. "What is the meaning of this?" The Empress's own ornate mask gleamed in the chamber's soft bioluminescent light. "This is Jace Rivera, a healer from the Terran colonies. He specializes in what humans call physical therapy." The words hung in the air like a forbidden incantation. Physical therapy meant contact. Touch was the ultimate taboo. No one had laid hands on Zara since her ceremonial coming of age at 16, and even her childhood caretakers had only touched her when absolutely necessary. Jay stepped forward, his movements careful and non-threatening. "Your Highness, I understand this is unconventional, but I've reviewed your medical files. I believe I can help with your condition." His voice was warm, lacking the formal musical cadences of court speech. When he spoke, he looked directly at her faceplate, not at the floor as protocol demanded for outsiders. "You would touch me?" The question escaped before she could contain it. "Only with your consent," Jace replied simply. "Healing requires trust, and trust requires choice." Zara felt something flutter in her chest, not pain, but something far more dangerous: hope. The Empress moved closer, her ceremonial robes rustling like whispered secrets. "The court cannot know of this. If word spreads that we've brought a human to treat you, that we've allowed," she paused, "contact, it could destabilize our entire social structure." "I understand the risks," Zara said, though her heart was racing beneath her ceremonial breastplate. "When do we begin?" 3 days later, Zara found herself in a chamber she'd never seen before, a small, windowless room deep within the medical wing. Its walls were lined with sound dampeners and privacy shields. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was being hidden within her own palace. Jace had arrived early, setting up what he called his equipment: soft cloths, bottles of oils that smelled like earth and unfamiliar flowers, and a padded surface that looked impossibly simple compared to their sophisticated medical devices. "The guards insisted on remaining," Zara said, gesturing to the 2 imposing figures flanking the door. Their energy weapons hummed softly, a not-so-subtle reminder of what would happen if the human overstepped. "I understand," Jace replied, washing his hands in a basin of warm water. "Though I hope they won't mind if I ask you to remove your outer ceremonial robes. I'll need access to your back and shoulders." The request sent a shock through the room. Even the guards shifted uncomfortably. Zara felt heat rise in her cheeks. Beneath her faceplate, no one outside her personal servants had ever seen her without the full ceremonial dress. She began, then stopped. The pain had been particularly severe that morning, radiating down her spine like liquid fire. "Very well." With trembling hands, she unfastened the complex magnetic clasps of her outer robe. letting it fall to reveal the simpler undergarment beneath. It still covered her completely, but the fabric was softer, designed to allow access to her shoulders and back for the rare medical procedures that required it. Jace's expression remained completely professional. "Would you prefer to sit on the edge of the treatment surface, or would lying down be more comfortable?" "Sitting," she said quickly. The vulnerability of lying down felt too intense. He moved behind her, and she felt his presence like warmth from a distant star. "I'm going to place my hands on your shoulders now," he said softly. "If you need me to stop at any time, just say so." The first touch was electric. His palms settled on her shoulders through the thin fabric, and Zara gasped not from pain, but from the complete absence of it. Where his hands rested, the constant tension simply melted away. "Good," Jace murmured, his voice closer now. "I can feel where you're holding the stress. Your muscles are like stone." His thumbs began to move in slow circles, finding knots of tension she didn't even know existed. The sensation was unlike anything in her experience, not the clinical efficiency of medical scans, not the formal rituals of court ceremony. This was personal, intimate, human. "Why does this work?" she whispered, afraid that speaking louder might break the spell. "Sometimes," Jace said, his hands continuing their gentle work, "the body remembers how to heal itself. It just needs permission." Behind them, one of the guards cleared his throat, a warning. But Zara found she didn't care. For the first time in months, the pain was receding, replaced by something she couldn't name, as Jace's hands moved along her spine, finding each point of tension and easing it away. She felt her ceremonial faceplate grow heavy. The weight of it, both physical and symbolic, seemed suddenly unbearable. Without thinking, she reached up and removed it. The guard's sharp intake of breath echoed in the small chamber. But Jace's hands never paused in their healing work. "Better?" he asked simply. "Better," she breathed, and meant more than just the pain. Her bare face felt the chamber's air like a caress, her skin tingling where the faceplate had pressed. Jace's hands continued their work, and she found herself leaning into his touch, her body learning to trust in a way it never had before. When the session ended, she felt transformed, not just healed, but awakened to possibilities she had never imagined. As she replaced her faceplate and robes, preparing to return to her role as the untouchable princess, she caught Jace's eyes one last time. "Same time in 3 days?" he asked quietly. "Yes," she said, her voice barely audible through the vocal harmonizers. But inside, she was screaming with joy. "Retriclod can make mistakes. Please double-check responses. Research bit a sonnet for." The healing sessions became the center around which Zara's world revolved. Every 3 days, she would slip away to the hidden chamber, always under the pretense of routine medical examinations. The guards had been sworn to absolute secrecy, but she could see the questions growing bolder in their eyes. With each visit, Guard Captain Knox had begun making subtle inquiries, his suspicion evident in the way he lingered outside the medical wing during her appointments. The scarred veteran had served the royal family for 2 decades, and his loyalty was unquestioned, which made his growing concern all the more dangerous. Jace never asked about the faceplate she had abandoned after that first real session. He simply accepted her bare features as naturally as he accepted everything else. Her violet-tinted skin, the delicate ridges along her temples that marked her as Nethi's nobility, the way her eyes shifted from silver to deep purple with her emotions. "Your people don't touch," he observed during their 7th session, his hands working along the tight muscles of her neck. "But your bodies crave it just like any other species." Zara let her eyes drift closed, savoring the warmth of human contact. "Touch is considered primitive among my kind, a loss of control. The noble houses pride themselves on maintaining distance, even from family. That sounds lonely," Jace said, his thumbs finding a particularly stubborn knot at the base of her skull. The simple statement cracked something open inside her chest. "I've never thought of it that way. It's simply how things are." "How things are," Jace repeated softly, "isn't always how things should be." She turned to face him then, studying his features without the barrier of her faceplate. His eyes were warm brown, creased at the corners from what she'd learned humans called smiling. His hands, which had brought her such relief, were strong but gentle, marked with small scars that spoke of a life lived fully. "On your world," she said carefully, "do people touch freely?" Jace paused in his work, moving to sit where she could see him properly. "Some do. Families, friends, lovers touch is how we show care, comfort, affection. It's not just about healing, it's about connection." The word hung between them like a bridge neither dared cross. Connection. What they had built in this small, hidden room over the past weeks felt like exactly that, a connection that transcended species, culture, and the vast gulf between their worlds. "I've never had that," Zara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Connection. Not real connection." Jace reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her face in his palm. The gesture was so tender, so completely unlike anything in her experience, that tears began to gather in her eyes. "You have it now," he said simply. The truth of it hit her like a solar flare. This human, this outsider who knew nothing of Nethi's protocol or imperial politics, saw her not Princess Zara Voss, heir to the throne and symbol of imperial perfection, but simply her. Outside the chamber, the sounds of palace life continued. Ceremonial bells, measured footsteps of guards, the hum of technology that kept their world running. But inside this small space, there was only the two of them and the dangerous, wonderful truth growing between them. Their 8th session was interrupted by Healer Kath, the chief royal physician whose treatments had failed so spectacularly. The tall, angular Nephis swept into the chamber with his usual air of superiority, his elaborate medical faceplate gleaming with data displays. "Your Highness," Kath said, his voice dripping with disdain as he noticed her bare face and Jace's proximity. "I must protest this primitive treatment. Surely you cannot believe that simple manipulation of tissue can accomplish what our advanced molecular medicine cannot." Zara straightened, feeling defensive of both Jace and the healing he had provided. "The results speak for themselves, Healer Kath. I have experienced more relief in these past weeks than in all the months under your care." Kath's faceplate flickered with indignation. "Relief that comes at what cost? You expose yourself to contamination, to improper contact with an alien species. The risks," Jace interrupted quietly, standing to face the physician, "are minimal compared to the benefits. I've reviewed your treatment protocols. You've been trying to fix the neural damage without addressing the secondary muscular compensation. The body creates its own pain cycles when it can't move naturally. You dare to question my methods?" Kath's voice rose to a dangerous pitch. "I question any method that leaves a patient in unnecessary suffering," Jace replied calmly. "Guard." Captain Knox chose that moment to enter the chamber, his weathered face grim beneath his functional mask. "Your Highness, forgive the intrusion, but Minister Vex requests an immediate audience. He says it concerns your recent medical consultations." Zara's blood ran cold. Minister Vex was the most traditionalist member of the Royal Council, a man who believed that any deviation from ancient customs was tantamount to heresy. If he had learned about her sessions with Jace, "Tell the minister I will attend him shortly," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. As the guards and Healer Kath filed out, Knox lingered for a moment, his eyes meeting Zara's. "Your Highness," he said quietly, "be careful. The palace has many ears, and not all of them are friendly." When they were alone again, Zara turned to Jace, fear evident in her shifting eyes. "If they discover what we've been doing," Jace said firmly, taking her hands in his, "is healing. Nothing more, nothing less." But even as he spoke the words, they both knew it was no longer true. What had begun as medical treatment had become something far more dangerous and infinitely more precious. They were no longer just healer and patient, they were two souls finding each other across the vast darkness of space. And in the rigid, traditional world of the Nethi's empire, that connection might prove more explosive than any weapon. The private council chamber felt smaller than usual as Zara faced Minister Vex across the polished obsidian table. The elderly statesman's ceremonial mask was more elaborate than most, carved with the symbols of his ancient house and inlaid with precious metals that caught the light like captured stars. But even through the ornate facade, she could feel the weight of his disapproval. "Your Highness," Vex began, his voice carrying the formal cadences that had echoed through these halls for centuries. "There are disturbing reports about your recent medical treatments, Sira." Zera's loyal handmaiden stood silently in the corner of the chamber. The young woman had served Zera since childhood, and her presence was both a comfort and a reminder of how much was at stake. If the scandal touched Zera, it would inevitably spread to those who served her. "I'm not certain what you mean, Minister," Zera replied carefully. Grateful that her faceplate concealed her expression, Vex leaned forward, his fingers steepled. Before him, Healer Keth has expressed concerns about your treatment regimen. He speaks of improper methods, of contact with alien hands, of abandonment of proper protocols. The words hit like physical blows, but Zera forced herself to remain. Still, Healer Keth's methods proved ineffective. "My mother approved alternative treatment. Your mother," Vex said slowly, "may have acted without considering the full implications. The sanctity of the royal person is not merely about your individual well-being, Your Highness. It represents the purity of our entire civilization." Zera felt anger flare in her chest, not just at the accusation, but at the casual dismissal of her suffering. "Would you prefer I remain in constant pain to preserve your notion of purity?" "I would prefer," Vex replied coldly, "that you remember your duty to your people and your bloodline. What message does it send if our future empress submits to the primitive ministrations of an alien?" The chamber door chimed softly, and Empress Thalia entered with her usual grace. Even through her ornate mask, Zera could sense her mother's tension. "Minister Vex," the Empress said, taking her seat at the head of the table, "I understand you have concerns about our medical protocols, Your Majesty." Vex inclined his head respectfully. "I fear we face a crisis that threatens the very foundation of our society. If word spreads that Princess Zera has been touched by alien hands, the implications could be catastrophic." "The only thing that should concern us," Thalia replied with steel in her voice, "is my daughter's health and well-being." Vex's mask tilted slightly, a gesture that somehow conveyed profound disapproval. "With respect, Your Majesty, the princess belongs to the Empire first, herself second. Her body is sacred, untouchable, a symbol of our racial superiority and cultural purity. My body," Zera said, her voice rising despite her efforts to remain calm, "belongs to me." The silence that followed was absolute. Even Sira seemed to stop breathing. Such a statement was not merely rebellious, it was revolutionary. Vex recovered first, his voice dripping with false concern. "Your Highness speaks from pain and confusion. Surely you cannot mean such words." But Zera was done with pretense. The weeks of healing, of connection, of being seen as more than a symbol had changed something fundamental inside her. "I mean every word. I am tired of being treated like a relic instead of a person." She stood, removing her faceplate, with deliberate care and setting it on the table. The gasps from both Vex and Sira echoed through the chamber. "For months I suffered in silence because your precious protocols valued my purity over my pain. A human healer succeeded where all are advanced. Medicine failed, not through superior technology, but through simple compassion." Vex's mask seemed to quiver with rage. "You speak of compassion. This human has corrupted you, filled your mind with dangerous ideas about individual worth over collective duty." "He has shown me what I had been missing my entire life," Zera replied, her bare face radiant with conviction. "Not just physical healing, but emotional connection. Not just medical treatment, but genuine care." The admission hung in the air like a confession and a challenge. "Connection." Vex repeated the word like a curse. "You speak of connection with an alien creature while your own people await your leadership, perhaps," Zera said, moving toward the chamber's viewing wall and gazing out at the city below. "My people deserve a leader who understands that strength and compassion are not enemies." When she turned back to face them, her eyes held a determination that made even her mother straighten in surprise. "I am in love with him." The words fell into the chamber like stones into still water, sending ripples of shock through everyone present. Sira's hand flew to her mouth. Vex recoiled as if struck, and even the Empress seemed stunned into silence. "Your Highness," Vex whispered, his voice hoarse with horror, "you cannot mean—" "I love Jace Rivera," Zera continued, her voice growing stronger with each word. He has shown me what it means to be truly seen, truly valued. He heals not just with his hands, but with his heart. Vex rose from his chair, his ceremonial robes rustling with agitation. This is impossible, unthinkable. The human must be eliminated immediately, and you must be confined until this madness passes. The only madness, Zara replied, is a system that values symbols over souls. The Empress finally found her voice. Zara, my daughter, do you understand what you're saying? The implications, I understand perfectly, Mother. I understand that I have spent my entire life being everything to everyone except myself. I understand that our empire has grown strong through isolation, but isolation without connection is not strength, it's fear. She picked up her faceplate, holding it like a relic from a forgotten age. I choose connection. I choose love. I choose him. Vex's mask turned toward the Empress, his voice urgent with panic. Your Majesty, you must act immediately. Confine the princess, execute the human. Seal this chamber until we can determine how much damage has been done. But Thalia was staring at her daughter with something that might have been wonder for the first time in decades. She was seeing Zara not as the heir apparent, but as the woman she had become, Minister Vex. The Empress said slowly, "You may leave us. I need to speak with my daughter privately. Your Majesty, surely now, Minister." After Vex and Sira had withdrawn, mother and daughter faced each other across the table, one masked, one bare, both carrying the weight of an empire's expectations. "Are you certain?" Thalia asked quietly. "I have never been more certain of anything in my life." The Empress reached up and removed her own mask, revealing a face lined with years of duty, but softened by unexpected pride. "Then we must prepare for war," she said simply, "because after today, everything changes." The great assembly hall of the Nethys Palace had not witnessed such a gathering in over a century. Every noble house, every court official, every influential voice in the empire had been summoned to witness what Minister Vex called the restoration of imperial dignity. Zara sat on the throne beside her mother, wearing the full ceremonial regalia of her station, layers of traditional robes, the ancient crown of her bloodline, and the most elaborate faceplate ever crafted for a Nethys princess. She looked every inch the perfect imperial heir, which made what she was about to do all the more shocking. Below, in the center of the hall, Jace knelt in restraints, flanked by guards. He had been given the simple gray robes of the condemned, but his posture remained straight, his head unbowed. Even facing possible execution, he refused to show fear. The assembled nobles whispered among themselves, their masks gleaming like a constellation of judgment. Word of the scandal had spread despite all attempts at secrecy, and the hall crackled with anticipation. Citizens of the Empire. Minister Vex's voice echoed through the vast chamber, amplified by the acoustic enhancers built into the ancient walls. "We gather today to address a crime that strikes at the very heart of our civilization." He gestured toward Jace with theatrical disdain. "This human has violated our most sacred laws, corrupting our princess with primitive contact rituals and filling her mind with dangerous ideas about individual desire over collective duty." Murmurs rippled through the assembled crowd, some scandalized, others curious, all captivated by the unprecedented drama unfolding before them. The sentence, Vex continued, his voice rising with righteous fervor, should be death by void exposure. However, in her mercy, the Empress has agreed to commute this to permanent exile provided the princess publicly renounces any connection to this creature and reaffirms her commitment to our sacred traditions. All eyes turned to Zara. This was her moment, the crossroads between the life she had been born to and the life she had discovered she wanted. She rose slowly, the weight of her ceremonial robes making each movement deliberate and significant. The hall fell silent as she approached the speaking platform, her footsteps echoing in the vast space like a heartbeat. "Minister Vex," she said, her voice carrying clearly through the amplification system, "you speak of corruption and violation, but I would ask you, what is more corrupting, the gentle healing of pain, or the refusal to acknowledge it, the honest expression of care, or the mask that hides all authentic emotion?" She reached up and removed her ceremonial faceplate, letting it fall to the platform with a crystalline crash that seemed to echo forever. Gasps erupted throughout the hall. Several nobles half froze from their seats in shock. Minister Vex's own mask seemed to quiver with rage. "You speak of this man as if he were a disease," Zara continued, her bare face radiant with conviction. "But he healed me when your protocols failed. He treated me with kindness when your customs left me suffering. He saw me not as a symbol or a title, but as a person worthy of care and respect." She turned to face Jace, and even across the distance, she could see the love and pride shining in his eyes. "Jace Rivera showed me what I had been missing my entire life, not just physical healing, but emotional connection. Not just duty, but choice, and I choose him." The hall erupted. Nobles shouted over each other, some in outrage, others in amazement. Guards looked uncertainly between their commanders and the princess. The Empress sat motionless on her throne, her mask revealing nothing. "I choose him," Zara repeated, her voice rising above the chaos. "And I choose change. Our empire has grown strong through isolation, but strength without compassion is mere cruelty. Power without connection is empty dominance." Minister Vex found his voice, though it cracked with desperation. "You cannot. You are the heir. You have duties, obligations to your bloodline and your people." "My first duty," Zara replied, looking directly at her mother, "is to my conscience, and my conscience tells me that our people deserve a ruler who understands that strength and tenderness are not opposites, they are partners." She removed the crown from her head, setting it gently on the platform beside her discarded faceplate. "I renounce my claim to the throne," she said clearly, her words carrying to every corner of the vast hall. "Not because I am weak, but because I am finally strong enough to choose my own path." The silence that followed was absolute. Then, from somewhere in the crowd, came the sound of slow clapping. One of the younger nobles, then another, then dozens, rising to their feet in approval. Jace was openly weeping now, still kneeling, but no longer bowed. The guards had stepped back, uncertain of their authority in the face of such unprecedented events. The Empress finally spoke, her voice carrying clearly through the hall despite its quiet tone. "My daughter," she said, rising from her throne, "you have shown courage I never possessed. You have chosen love over fear, connection over isolation." She paused, her mask turning to survey the assembled nobles. "Perhaps it is time for our empire to learn what true strength looks like." To everyone's amazement, she reached up and removed her own mask, revealing a face that showed both age and wisdom, sorrow and hope. "Guards," she commanded, her voice ringing with imperial authority, "release the prisoner. There will be no exile today. Instead, there will be change." As Jace was freed from his restraints and allowed to approach the platform, Zara felt the last chains of her old life fall away. When he reached her, she took his hands in front of the entire assembly, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that would have been scandalous mere hours before. "Are you sure?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. She smiled, her face radiant with joy and certainty. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Behind them, the hall transformed. Nobles began removing their own masks, as if Zara's courage had given them permission to be authentic. The rigid formality of centuries began to crack and crumble, replaced by something warmer, more real, more alive. The Empress approached them, her unmasked face kind and proud. "You will both need to learn to navigate this new world we're creating," she said softly. "The Empire will need leaders who understand both strength and compassion." "Together," Zara asked, hardly daring to hope. "Together," the Empress confirmed. "You've shown them that courage today. Now show them how to love." As celebration continued around them, Jace pulled Zara close, their foreheads touching as they had done in their secret chamber. "What happens now?" she whispered, echoing her question from weeks before. Jace smiled, his hand finding hers as naturally as breath. "Now we build something new, together." 6 months after the Trial of Hearts, as historians had begun calling it, the Nephis Empire was transforming in ways no one could have imagined. The rigid protocols that had governed social interaction for millennia were giving way to something unprecedented, authentic connection. Zara stood on the observation deck of the palace's highest tower, watching the sunrise paint the crystal spires in shades of gold and amber. Her simple robes comfortable, practical, beautiful without being ostentatious were a far cry from the elaborate ceremonial dress she had once worn like armor. Beside her, Jace reviewed the day's schedule on a data tablet, his presence as natural as breathing. "The delegation from the outer colonies arrives this afternoon," he said, his fingers intertwining with hers as he spoke. "They're eager to establish the new cultural exchange protocols." Zara smiled, marveling at how much had changed. The woman who had once been too sacred to touch was now working alongside her human partner to revolutionize her entire civilization. The irony was not lost on her. "And the response from the other core worlds?" she asked. "Mixed," Jace admitted. "The Altair Republic is interested but cautious. The Centauri Alliance thinks we've lost our minds, but the independent systems are fascinated. 3 more have requested diplomatic missions to study our social innovations." The sound of footsteps made them turn. Empress Thalia approached, her own transformation perhaps the most remarkable of all. The woman who had ruled through careful distance and ceremonial isolation now moved with an ease that spoke of genuine contentment. Behind her walked Sira, no longer a silent handmaiden, but Zara's chief advisor on cultural transition. "The morning briefings are ready," Sira announced, her own face bare and expressive in a way that would have been unthinkable in the old order. "The Council of Reformed Houses is eager to discuss the new trade agreements." The Council of Reformed Houses, that had been one of the most surprising developments. In the weeks following Zara's dramatic renunciation, nearly half of the noble families had voluntarily abandoned the rigid mask protocols that had defined their class for centuries. Led by progressive voices who had long chafed under the old restrictions, they formed a new governing body, dedicated to what they called governance through genuine connection. Minister Vex and his traditionalist faction had initially resisted, threatening civil war and invoking ancient laws about royal succession. But when no significant popular support materialized for their cause, even they had been forced to adapt. Vex himself still wore his elaborate mask, but he no longer commanded the influence he once had. "The medical exchange program is showing remarkable results," Thalia said, settling into a chair that overlooked the city. "Jace's techniques are being taught in healing centers across 7 systems. Now, it had been Jace's idea to formalize what had begun as forbidden therapy into a legitimate medical discipline. Teams of human healers were now working alongside traditional Nethys physicians, their combined approaches proving more effective than either method alone. The pilot program's success had sparked interest from species across the galaxy. "More than that," Jace added, his voice warm with pride. "We're seeing psychological benefits that go beyond physical healing. Patients who receive combination therapy report better emotional well-being, stronger family connections, increased empathy." Zara squeezed his hand gently. "It's almost as if connection itself is healing." "Speaking of connection," Sira said with a mischievous smile, "the wedding preparations are proceeding beautifully. The architects have finalized the designs for the ceremony space, something that honors both human and Nethys traditions while breaking new ground. The wedding, 3 months hence. Zara and Jace would be joined in the first recorded interspecies royal marriage in Nethys history. The ceremony would be broadcast across the galaxy, a symbol of the new era they were helping to create. "Any word from the religious authorities?" Zara asked. "The traditional temples are still debating," Thalia replied diplomatically, "but the Reformed Spiritual Council has formally blessed the union. They're calling it a sacred bridge between worlds." Even religion was evolving. The ancient Nethys faith, which had emphasized purity and separation, was giving way to new interpretations that celebrated connection and unity. Young priests and priestesses were studying human philosophies, finding common ground between species. That had seemed impossible just months before. A soft chime indicated an incoming transmission. Sira activated the communication array, and a holographic figure materialized. Ambassador Cade from the Terran Colonial Union. "Your Highness, Mr. Rivera," the ambassador said with a warm smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all, Ambassador," Zara replied. "What news from Earth?" "Remarkable news, actually. The Colonial Union has formally approved the Nethys Accords. Your model of cultural integration is being studied by xenosociologists. Across human space, there's talk of establishing similar programs with other species. Jace leaned forward, his eyes bright with possibility. How many species have expressed interest? 17 so far, with more joining every week. The Aquatic Collective is particularly intrigued apparently. They've had similar issues with social isolation in their deep ocean cities. After the ambassadors signed off, the small group sat in comfortable silence, absorbing the magnitude of what they had set in motion. What had begun as one woman's desperate search for healing had become a catalyst for galactic social evolution. Do you ever regret it? Thalia asked her daughter quietly, giving up the crown. Choosing this uncertain path, Zara looked out over the city, where Nethys citizens now walked with their faces bare, where human visitors moved freely through markets that had once been restricted, where children of different species played together in the floating gardens. The only thing I regret, she said, is how long it took me to find the courage. Jace wrapped his arm around her shoulders, his touch as natural as sunlight. The courage found you when you needed it most. As the morning progressed, and they prepared for another day of building their new world, Zara reflected on the journey that had brought them here. A princess locked in ceremonial isolation, a healer carrying simple human wisdom, and a love that had somehow bridged the vast distances between stars. The Nethys Empire was no longer an empire. In the traditional sense, it was becoming something new, something unprecedented. A confederation of connected worlds, united not by force or fear, but by the radical idea that all sentient beings deserve to be truly seen, truly valued, truly touched by compassion, and at the heart of it all, to hands clasped together, one human, one alien, both reaching toward a future bright with impossible possibility. The revolution had begun with a single touch. Now it was spreading across the galaxy, one connection at a time, outside the palace walls. The twin suns of the Nethys system rose higher into the amber sky, their light touching crystal spires and floating gardens, illuminating a world where masks were no longer mandatory, where touch was no longer forbidden, and where love had finally found a way to triumph over the ancient fears that had kept hearts apart. The empire of isolation had become the commonwealth of connection, and the galaxy would never be the same.